When the future Sultan Murad IV was born in 1612 within the immense, jeweled, heavily guarded labyrinth of the Topkapi Palace overlooking the Bosporus, the Ottoman Empire was already beginning to feel the cold winds of decay creeping beneath the golden curtains of imperial grandeur. For although the empire still stretched from Hungary to Yemen, and from Baghdad to Algeria, possessing armies that terrified Europe, and cities whose wealth dazzled ambassadors from Venice, France, Persia, and England alike, the machinery that had once made the Ottomans unstoppable was no longer moving with the same disciplined precision that had carried the armies of Mehmed the Conqueror and Suleiman the Magnificent across continents. The Janissaries had grown restless and arrogant, no longer merely the obedient slave soldiers of earlier centuries, but now political kingmakers who interfered openly in state affairs. While provincial governors enriched themselves through corruption, rebellions flared in Anatolia, the treasury suffered from inflation and military overextension, and palace conspiracies multiplied behind silk curtains, where whispers could kill more swiftly than swords. Murad entered this dangerous world as the son of Sultan Ahmed I and the formidable Kaysem Sultan, one of the most politically intelligent and influential women in Ottoman history, and from the very beginning his life was shaped not by peace or innocence, but by fear, ambition, intrigue, and blood. For the Ottoman court was not merely a royal household, it was a battlefield disguised as paradise. Before Murad ever sat upon the throne, he grew up in a palace haunted by one terrible truth that every Ottoman prince understood from childhood: succession in the Ottoman dynasty was rarely peaceful, and brothers often became executioners of brothers. The Ottoman system had evolved into something simultaneously brilliant and horrifying, because unlike many European kingdoms, where succession disputes could drag nations into decades of civil war, the Ottomans often solved dynastic instability through ruthless elimination of rival claimants, and generations of princes had therefore lived under the constant shadow of strangulation by silk bowstrings carried by mute executioners. Murad's own father, Ahmed I, had altered some of these traditions by allowing his brother Mustafa to live rather than be executed, but this act of mercy unintentionally created new instability within the dynasty, because it established the precedent that princes could survive to challenge future rulers. When Ahmed I died in 1617, Murad was still a child. The throne first passed to his mentally unstable uncle Mustafa I, then to his brother Osman II, the brilliant yet tragic young reformer who attempted to break Janissary power and paid for it with his life in one of the most shocking events in Ottoman history. In 1622, Sultan Osman II was overthrown, humiliated, imprisoned, and murdered by rebellious Janissaries after the disastrous Polish campaign following the Battle of Hattin, and the image of a reigning Ottoman Sultan being dragged down by his own soldiers sent shockwaves throughout the empire. The empire had crossed a terrifying threshold. The soldiers no longer feared the throne, and in the chaos that followed Osman's death, the young Murad became Sultan in 1623, only 11 years old. An 11-year-old boy inherited the most powerful empire in the Islamic world at the exact moment it was beginning to tear itself apart. Because Murad was too young to govern, real authority initially rested in the hands of his mother, Kaysem Sultan, whose political brilliance allowed her to dominate the imperial court during one of the most dangerous periods in Ottoman history. Kaysem was no passive figure hidden behind palace walls. She was a strategist, a negotiator, a survivor, a woman who understood that power inside the Ottoman court flowed through invisible channels of loyalty, bribery, influence, marriage alliances, eunuch networks, and military favor. As valid Sultan, or Queen Mother, she effectively became regent of the empire, receiving ambassadors, influencing appointments, balancing factions, and attempting to preserve stability while the empire convulsed around her. Yet even Kaysem's intelligence could not immediately stop the empire's descent into violence. Anatolia burned with the Salali rebellions, massive uprisings fueled by economic collapse, corruption, taxation, and social unrest. Provincial governors behaved like independent warlords. The Safavid Persians seized opportunities to attack Ottoman territory in the east. In Baghdad, Ottoman authority collapsed. The Janissaries grew increasingly uncontrollable. And in Istanbul itself, the palace became a theatre of paranoia, where viziers rose and fell with terrifying speed. Young Murad watched all of this. He watched grown men betray each other for power. He watched ministers executed. He watched soldiers threaten the throne itself. He watched the empire humiliate itself before enemies. And these experiences carved something hard and merciless inside him. The frightened child slowly transformed into a ruler who believed that fear was the only language capable of saving the empire. As Murad entered adolescence, he began to seize power personally from the factions that had dominated his early reign, and what emerged shocked the empire. The quiet boy became a force of terrifying energy. Murad IV grew physically imposing, known for extraordinary strength, athleticism, and martial skill, with chroniclers describing him as a man capable of wielding heavy weapons with astonishing ease and participating directly in military activities, rather than merely observing them ceremonially. But it was not merely his physical presence that frightened people. It was his will. Unlike weaker rulers manipulated by palace factions, Murad possessed fierce determination and volcanic anger. And after years of humiliation suffered by the Ottoman state, he became obsessed with restoring absolute authority. He concluded that leniency had weakened the empire. Therefore, mercy became dangerous. The turning point came after repeated revolts and acts of military indiscipline threatened the state itself. Murad began eliminating opponents ruthlessly. Officials suspected of corruption were executed. Rebellious soldiers were crushed. Governors who defied authority disappeared. Spies multiplied throughout Istanbul. The Sultan himself reportedly wandered the streets in disguise at night, searching for violations of his decrees or signs of sedition. Whether every tale about these nocturnal patrols is entirely true matters less than the fact that contemporaries believed them. Fear itself became one of Murad's political weapons. Murad IV's reign became legendary for strict authoritarian measures designed to restore discipline within Ottoman society. Coffee houses were closed. Alcohol was banned. Tobacco was outlawed. Public disorder was punished savagely. At first glance, these decrees appeared purely religious or moralistic, but they were deeply political. Coffee houses in the Ottoman world were not merely places where people drank coffee. They were centers of conversation, criticism, gossip, political discussion, and potential conspiracy. In these crowded establishments, Janissaries, merchants, scholars, and ordinary citizens exchanged rumors about the government, mocked officials, and spread unrest. Murad understood this. He understood that rebellion often began with whispers before swords. So he attempted to crush not only physical revolt, but the social spaces where opposition formed. Stories spread throughout Istanbul of executions carried out personally by the Sultan against violators of these bans. Some tales were likely exaggerated by frightened observers, yet Murad deliberately cultivated this terrifying image because he wanted the empire to believe that the Sultan was everywhere, watching everything. The effect was dramatic. Crime decreased, street disorder diminished, military discipline improved. But fear also spread like poison through the capital. Istanbul became quieter, more obedient, and infinitely more afraid. While Murad struggled internally against rebellion and corruption, the empire faced major external humiliation against the Safavid Empire. The Ottoman-Safavid conflict had dominated Middle Eastern politics for generations, fueled not only by territorial rivalry, but also by sectarian hostility between the Sunni Ottomans and Shia Safavids. During Murad's early reign, Ottoman weakness encouraged Persian offensives. In 1624, the Safavids captured Baghdad. The loss was catastrophic. Baghdad was not merely a city, it was one of the great jewels of the Islamic world, associated with the Abbasid Caliphate, Islamic scholarship, trade, prestige, and immense symbolic importance. Its fall shattered Ottoman prestige across the Muslim world. The Safavid ruler Abbas I of Persia and his successors exploited Ottoman instability masterfully, while Ottoman commanders struggled against disorganization and internal division. For Murad, the loss of Baghdad became personal. He saw it not only as territorial defeat, but as an insult to Ottoman honor. And unlike rulers who delegated warfare entirely to generals, Murad intended eventually to lead the reconquest himself. One of the most remarkable aspects of Murad IV's reign was his transformation into a genuinely active military ruler at a time when many Ottoman sultans had become increasingly detached from campaigns. Earlier great sultans, such as Mehmed II and Suleiman the Magnificent, had personally commanded armies, but over time many rulers remained within palace walls, while grand viziers led campaigns. Murad rejected this passivity. He believed the empire required visible strength from its ruler. And so, in the late 1630s, he personally led massive eastern campaigns against Persia. The logistics alone was staggering. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers marched across Anatolia. Cannons rolled through mud and mountain passes. Supply caravans stretched 4 miles. Engineers repaired roads and bridges. Provincial officials scrambled to feed the advancing army. The Sultan rode with his men through brutal conditions, projecting the image not merely of a monarch, but of a conquering commander in the tradition of earlier Ottoman greatness. His first major success came with the capture of Yerevan in 1635. The campaign was difficult and exhausting, yet Murad's presence electrified the army. He hunted with soldiers, inspected fortifications personally, punished incompetence instantly, rewarded bravery lavishly. The campaign restored morale within the empire and revived memories of the old conquering sultans. Yet Murad's greatest moment still lay ahead. In 1638, Murad IV launched a campaign that would define his reign forever, the reconquest of Baghdad. The city had remained under Safavid control for 14 years, and recovering it became both military necessity and symbolic crusade. The march eastward resembled the movement of an empire determined to reclaim its lost dignity. Ottoman banners covered the horizon. Janissaries marched beneath kettledrums and standards. CP cavalry thundered across plains. Artillery crews dragged enormous siege guns toward the ancient city. Religious scholars accompanied the army, framing the campaign as both imperial and sacred. Murad himself dominated the expedition psychologically. He was feared by enemies and subordinates alike. Failure under his command could mean execution, but success promised immense reward and honor. When the Ottomans reached Baghdad, they confronted formidable defenses and determined Safavid resistance. The siege became brutal. Cannons shattered walls. Counterattacks drenched trenches in blood. Disease spread among soldiers. The heat of Mesopotamia exhausted men and animals alike. Yet Murad refused retreat. He drove the siege relentlessly forward. Ottoman artillery pounded the city day after day, while assault forces stormed breaches amid horrifying casualties. Finally, after weeks of relentless fighting, Baghdad fell to the Ottomans in December 1638. The victory transformed Murad's reputation permanently. The empire erupted in celebration. The humiliation of 1624 had been avenged. The Sultan, who had inherited chaos, had restored Ottoman honor through force of will, discipline, and military success. The reconquest of Baghdad also stabilized the Ottoman Safavid frontier for generations, eventually formalized in the Treaty of Zuhab in 1639, which established borders that would influence the modern frontier between Iraq and Iran. Murad had achieved something extraordinary, but victory came at terrible cost. And the man who returned from Baghdad was increasingly consumed by exhaustion, paranoia, and excess. For all his brilliance and strength, Murad IV ruled through fear so intensely that even high-ranking officials lived in terror. Executions became frequent. Suspicion infected the court. The Sultan's temper was legendary. Some chroniclers describe terrifying scenes in which officials were killed for incompetence, perceived disloyalty, or simple failure to satisfy Murad's expectations. Even members of his own family were not safe. Ottoman dynastic politics remained deeply brutal, and Murad ordered the execution of several brothers to secure the throne against possible succession threats. Only one brother, the future Ibrahim, survived. According to many accounts, Ibrahim lived in constant terror within the palace, believing each summons might lead to execution. The atmosphere inside Topkapi became psychologically suffocating. Silence became survival. Servants whispered. Viziers calculated every word. The Sultan who restored order also spread dread through every corridor of power. And tragically, Murad himself increasingly fell victim to the very excesses he publicly condemned. Despite his bans on alcohol, sources indicate that Murad drank heavily in private, and over time his health deteriorated severely. The contradiction was striking. The ruler who enforced iron discipline upon the empire could not fully master his own destructive impulses. Murad IV occupies a fascinating place in Ottoman history because he represented both restoration and warning. He undeniably rescued the empire from immediate collapse. When he took power, the state was spiraling toward fragmentation. By the end of his reign, central authority had been restored, military prestige revived, and internal disorder suppressed. He proved that the Ottoman state could still produce formidable rulers capable of commanding fear and obedience. Yet his methods also revealed deeper structural problems within the empire. The system required extraordinary force merely to maintain stability. Fear could restore order temporarily, but it could not permanently solve corruption, military stagnation, economic strain, or factional rivalry. Murad ruled like a storm, powerful, violent, temporary, and when storms pass, underlying weaknesses often remain. By the late 1630s, Murad's health had deteriorated dramatically, likely worsened by alcoholism and the immense physical and psychological pressures of rule. The warrior who had marched across Anatolia and conquered Baghdad was dying before the age of 30. In 1640, at only 27 years old, Murad IV died in Istanbul. The empire mourned him with a mixture of grief, fear, admiration, and relief. For many subjects, he had been a savior who restored discipline and imperial prestige. For others, he had been a tyrant whose wrath darkened the empire. His death created immediate anxiety because he left no strong adult heir. The throne passed to his surviving brother Ibrahim, a psychologically fragile man traumatized by years of imprisonment and fear inside the palace. Murad reportedly considered executing Ibrahim before his death, but refrained because doing so might extinguish the Ottoman dynasty entirely. That single decision preserved the imperial line, and so the fate of the empire Baghdad Murad rested upon the shoulders of the brother he had terrified for years. Historians continue debating Murad IV because he embodied contradiction more intensely than almost any Ottoman ruler. He was cruel yet effective, brutal yet disciplined, cultured yet violent, a restorer of order who ruled through terror, a conqueror who saved the empire from humiliation while deepening the atmosphere of fear within its political culture. Yet there is no denying his impact. He halted imperial disintegration at a moment when collapse seemed terrifyingly possible. He restored military prestige through direct leadership. He reclaimed Baghdad. He crushed rebellions. He forced the Janissaries temporarily back into obedience. And he reminded the empire what an active, commanding sultan looked like after years of weakness and instability. In many ways, Murad IV was the last Ottoman ruler before the modern age who truly resembled the conquering warrior sultans of earlier centuries. After him, the empire would increasingly struggle against internal decay, foreign pressure, military stagnation, and political fragmentation. Murad did not permanently solve these problems, but for a brief, thunderous moment, he forced the empire to stand upright again. Long after his death, stories about Murad IV lingered across Istanbul. People spoke of the giant sultan wandering the streets disguised in darkness. They whispered about executions carried out with terrifying suddenness. They remembered the smoking ruins of Baghdad's siege. They recalled the silence that fell over coffee houses when his name was mentioned, and they remembered that beneath the fear there had once existed something the empire desperately needed during its hour of crisis: a ruler who refused weakness. Murad IV was not gentle. He was not merciful. He was not beloved in the warm and poetic manner of Suleiman the Magnificent, but he was unforgettable. He emerged from an empire drowning in rebellion, corruption, military arrogance, and political chaos, and through sheer willpower, violence, charisma, and relentless determination, he dragged it back from the edge of disaster. For a generation that had watched sultans manipulated, overthrown, and murdered, Murad IV appeared like a blade drawn suddenly from darkness, cold, sharp, merciless, and impossible to ignore. And though the empire he saved would continue struggling long after his death, the memory of the Iron Sultan endured across centuries as both warning and legend, the ruler who restored Ottoman power not through softness or compromise, but through fear, fire, and war.